Closing arguments are underway in Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud trial. The disgraced FTX founder has spent the past few days on the witness stand. Prosecutors used prior interviews and social media posts from the defendant to undermine his credibility. CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett joins us now. He has been there since the beginning. Errol, we will discuss closing arguments, but let's start with cross-examination. Walk us through yesterday's testimony and if Bankman-Fried's decision to take the stand could hurt him in the long run.
Yeah, that's right, Meg. I've just left the courthouse to bring you this update. But if the jury should return a guilty verdict against Sam Bankman-Fried, I am certain that it will be because of what he said during cross-examination when he made himself susceptible to specific questions on the government's case. Now, look, the jury has not started to deliberate just yet, but it is incredibly risky for a defendant who's facing 7 felony counts for $1 billion of alleged fraud impacting millions of customers to say that he would put himself on the witness stand. And so what the jurors watched were pointed and specific questions from the government about his business practice, what he knew and when he knew it, that he couldn't answer. At one point, not even acknowledging that he was the sole board member of the company, that he was moving money to and from. And a number of times, the Judge Kaplan, had to interrupt Sam Bankman-Fried's testimony to remind him to just answer questions clearly. And juries certainly do defer to judges often in cases like this. His testimony expanded from Friday to Monday. We saw more yesterday, and he, as I'm doing now, found it challenging to find his words. He found it difficult to respond to the testimony from his underlings, who all pled guilty and said he's the man who came up with the scheme to steal customer funds. And today we're seeing closing arguments as each side tries to button up this 4-week-plus case.
Well, it does sound like a risk taking the stand. It will be interesting to see what finally happens. Errol, as you know, both sides are making their final pitch to the jury. So what are we hearing from the prosecution?
Well, the prosecution came out swinging this morning, Meg, giving the closing arguments in this case, starting by saying from one of the prosecutors that when you ask yourself who is responsible for the billions in dollars in fraud, he pointed to Sam Bankman-Fried, who was only a few feet away from him, and said, it's this man. He then went back and now is using Sam Bankman-Fried's testimony against him when acknowledging that there's no question that money was misused. There's no question that customers' funds couldn't be recouped. And there's no question that Sam Bankman-Fried was at the top of each company that was making these moves. In fact, the quote that the prosecutor used is he said this was a pyramid of deceit built by lies and false promises, and it eventually collapsed, leaving customers in its wake. So a very vivid description from the prosecution right out the gate, pointing to Sam Bankman-Fried and saying that if you found that he lied on any of these points and that he's guilty of anything that we've laid out, then you have an obligation by this court to find him guilty. And that closing argument is continuing. Then we'll hear how the defense will try and explain Sam Bankman-Fried's actions.
Well, that's, you know, when you think about that term, the pyramid of deceit, the defense has argued all along that Bankman-Fried acted in good faith. What are we expecting to hear from them during closing arguments?
Yeah, Meg, it will be really interesting to see how the defense not only points to testimony and evidence, but tries to string together a clean and tidy narrative for this jury of regular New Yorkers to comprehend and understand as they evaluate the evidence. And of course, the burden of proof is on the side of the government because they are bringing forward this case. The defense really hasn't presented much of its own evidence beyond the price fluctuations of Bitcoin, which preceded the company's collapse, and a list of Sam Bankman-Fried's priorities. What they have said is that he didn't intend to defraud anyone and that it was his underlings' mistakes that were made. But certainly if there's an opportunity for a clean narrative, it's now before the jury deliberates.
All right, another detailed picture with this update. Errol Barnett, thank you so much.
You got it.